On today's episode, we'll be joining the citizen hearing as they discuss one of the most famous UFO cases in the world, known as the Roswell UFO incident. Thank you for joining me and welcome to another week of Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. I hope you all had a great weekend, and before we start today's episode, I'd like to thank Evelyn for their support and generosity. And if you haven't already, please consider following, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This always supports us by helping new listeners to find the show. You can also support us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you'd like your paranormal encounter shared on the podcast, you can submit your story through email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or of course on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And these links can be found in the show notes. Now, as I mentioned in our last episode, I'll be traveling for the remainder of August, which will affect our normal schedule. However, I didn't want to leave you without any content, so throughout the week, we'll be listening to a 3-part series of the citizen hearing, as they discuss the Roswell UFO incident. I hope you enjoy this series, and of course, starting back on September 1st, we'll be back to our regular schedule. So with that being said, let's begin Part 1 of the citizen hearing on UFO disclosure. Roswell.
To do that, go ahead and stand. And Stan, you can do it a second time, that's fine. Please repeat after me. I do hereby affirm that I will tell the truth and nothing but the truth to this committee today. Thank you.
Amen. Distinguished Congresswomen and Congressmen, good afternoon. I personally would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak out on behalf of the many now passed through the portals of history, unable to speak for themselves. Men and women who have served this country selflessly and with honor, who are witnesses to something extraordinary, something beyond the human condition. Most would maintain their sworn silence for a lifetime. Others would eventually confide to their immediate loved ones, or to us, the truth of the matter. Moreover, to these who this panel represents today, who so valiantly fought for freedom during World War II, who saved the world from Nazi domination, the fates were not finished with such devotion to their country. Within 2 years of the surrender of Germany and Japan, they would be called on again to lead us into an unprecedented awareness that we may be under another threat, another invader. However, this time, not from any distant nation, but conceivably from across the vast distance of space. Prior to the summer of 1947, visitors from other planets were strictly the fancy of science fiction writers. For lack of outside influence, spaceships were rockets, and spacemen looked like our neighbors down the street, all of which were portrayed in popular TV series such as Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers during that time period. Nevertheless, the summer of 1947 would forever change that perception. Among others, highly skilled and professional people, such as college professors, astronomers, and commercial pilots, were observing flying discs, and military fighters were scrambled on these reported unknown aerial objects. From all accounts, they outperformed and outmaneuvered the best we could throw at the newly arrived phenomenon. Their very words, flying saucers, would forever become part of our vernacular. Many assumed they were of American design. Many believed Soviet. But then something happened in the high desert of New Mexico, which would alter the course of history. Ironically, the first atomic bomb wing, the 509th Bomb Group, was stationed at Roswell in 1947. This was a composite group assigned in the final months of the war, comprised of the best officers, pilots and their crews, doctors, nurses, all in one unit, all with top security clearances, the elite within the United States military. Their mission, to drop one, and if necessary, additional atomic bombs on Japan. 2 years later, they would have another mission, unlike the first. This was an assignment to retrieve something which had dropped out of the sky. In addition, for those involved who knew the truth, the stars would beckon with even greater brightness. On July 8th of 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield announced to the world they had captured a flying saucer on a ranch north of town. This is a matter of historic fact. Detractors would suggest that other UFO accounts are based on a faulty premise, that the phenomenon exists. The Roswell incident of 1947 does not suffer any preconceived misinterpretation of the event. It entirely rests on the premise that the United States Army Air Corps recovered a crashed flying saucer. Historically, the first explanation lasted for all of 5 hours as it slowly evolved from something otherworldly into a very common off-the-shelf weather balloon device. Please allow me to propound a consideration for everyone here present. Would any of us have any difficulty identifying materials such as rubber, wooden sticks, reflective foil, masking tape, and string? No need to raise your hands. As a continuing insult to the integrity and intelligence of the very personnel who were in charge of the atomic bomb at Roswell, officialdom, after 65 years of ridicule and defamation of eyewitnesses, insists that this elite military squadron would all raise their hands. The balloon that was assembled and launched daily by these same personnel somehow morphed into wreckage that even by today's standards defied conventional explanation. Dozens of witnesses have described to us paper-thin, metal-like material that could not be damaged by any standard means. Yet you could crumble it up, crush it into a ball, release your grip, and it would open up and flow like water over your hands. Weather balloon? Not a single witness to that alternative explanation. Since that time, due to eyewitness pressure, along with the assistance of one of your esteemed colleagues, the late Congressman Stephen Schiff of New Mexico, it caused the Pentagon to issue 2 additional solutions to what was recovered back in 1947. The third being Project Mogul, which was the exact same balloon contraption with the inclusion of an acoustic device. The fourth and most baseless of all, time-traveling wooden crash dummies, parachuted 5 years later in 1952. Even Jay Leno made jest about such fodder after the Pentagon disclosed its fourth version. Editorial writers and newspaper cartoonists lampooned the very suggestion and indicted indicted proponents as the real dummies. To think we now have 4 official versions of one historic event. Even politicians can't get away with that. However, which is the consensus of the eyewitnesses? Which of the 4 would provide sufficient evidence, albeit circumstantial, in any court of law? Former U.S. Attorney General Joseph DeGenova has stated, quote, "Circumstantial evidence is often stronger than eyewitness testimony because it's based on the facts. When you have footprints in the snow, it proves someone was there." End quote. The Roswell incident has produced hundreds of footprints, not in the snow, but rather in the desert soil of New Mexico. Sworn affidavits and a growing list of deathbed testimonies, confessions, all stating that the first press release about the recovery of the flying saucer was the correct one. As attorneys, you all know that deathbeds are admissible. If we were to dismiss the Roswell witnesses, then we would have to deny all such end-of-life declarations. There should be no discrimination just because we do not like their testimony. The proponents of a new theory and ideas are rightfully pressed for answers. Yet whether one is able to offer evidence, either pro or con, should not be the issue. Rather, the situation where after years of inquiry and investigation, there still remains questions. The mystery continues. That alone should generate further doubt and speculation. To do otherwise and persist in ignoring one of the most significant discoveries of all time may be one of the greatest mistakes in the history of humanity. To paraphrase Shakespeare's Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are in your dreams. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the record, would you give a little bit of your background, just briefly?
My background, I worked for the U.S. Postal Service for about 25 years, and I graduated cum laude from Concordia University in Wisconsin. I was a special investigator for the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek of the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. I would become the center's director of special investigations for 10 years. I sat on their board of directors for 10 years. And to date, we have interviewed over 600 witnesses, either directly or indirectly involved, which have provided us with an opportunity to write 4 best-selling books on the Roswell incident. The Roswell movie, which starred Kyle MacLachlan, Martin Sheen, Dwight Yoakam, was based on our first book, UFO Crash at Roswell. So it's been quite an adventure. But I need emphasize to the panel that I was a complete skeptic. We thought we would make a single trip down to New Mexico and in a single weekend wrap this up, either coming away convinced that this was nothing more than a weather balloon or something else just as conventional. And upon speaking with first-hand witnesses, describing those very characteristics I mentioned of the material, of the wreckage, we realized that we needed to get back and continue tracking down as many witnesses as quickly as we could. We realized that we were potentially on one of the biggest stories of all time.
Thank you for your passion and your commitment to what you've been doing.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Friedman, you're an old witness here, so you know the rules.
I am the oldest witness here.
You're not even close to us. Go ahead.
You're right. I'd like to show the opticals, the visuals that I supplied, just to go through them quickly, very quickly. Biggest study ever done for the United States Air Force. Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 3,200 sightings, never referred to by the debunkers. The next one, please. Symposium on Unidentified Flying Objects. Those are the hearings of July 29th, 1968. I was the youngest then of the contributors to that. 254 pages, well worth looking at. The next one, please. Dr. J. Allen Hynek's book. He was only the Air Force Project Blue Book consultant for 20 years and chairman of the Department of Astronomy at Northwestern. You'd think when astronomers take whacks at UFOs, they would at least look at Allen's book, but they don't. The next one. There's the University of Colorado study, 965 pages, $539,000 it cost us. The press gave the vision that this proved there was nothing to flying saucers. A more careful look at the report shows that 30% of the 117 cases studied in detail could not be identified. You didn't hear that when the report came out. So let's get those out of the way, and then we'll go on to my prepared testimony here. People have often asked me why I think aliens would want to visit Earth. I have noted many reasons. Graduate students doing their thesis research on a primitive society, mining of dense metals as we have the densest planet in the solar system, etc. But the most important to me is that I consider all civilizations would be concerned about their own survival and security. That means keeping tabs on those primitive societies in the neighborhood that show signs of being able to bother them. By July 1947, it was clear to any aliens in the neighborhood that we have a primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare, and that soon, less than 100 years, which is nothing on a cosmic time scale, we would be able to visit aliens out there, taking our brand of friendship, everybody else calls it hostility, the facts that demonstrate that our nuclear weapons, powerful rockets, and radar, the beginning of advanced electronics. Isn't it amazing that the only place in the world at that time where you could study all three of these was southeastern New Mexico? Our first nuclear weapon was detonated at Trinity Site, White Sands Missile Range, July 16th, 1945. White Sands is where we were testing captured German V-2 rockets and some of our own. And that's where we had our best radar to track the rockets. Sometimes they went south instead of north. And of course, as it turns out, there were at least 3 flying saucer crashes in New Mexico. In early July 1947, there was a crash near the small town of Corona, less than 80 miles from the Roswell Army Airfield in nearby Roswell. 100 miles west, there was an unpublicized crash at about the same time in the plains of San Agustin. New book coming out this year about that, not by me. Book by Arthur Campbell. And there was a crash retrieval operation in Aztec, New Mexico in the Four Corners area, March 1948. New book is available. I was the first to hear about the Corona crash, as discussed in my book, Crash at Corona, with Don Berliner. Simple story. I began lecturing about flying saucers in 1967 while working as a nuclear physicist in industry for little companies such as GE, GM, Westinghouse, etc. In 1978, I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to speak at Louisiana State University. I was at a TV station to do 3 interviews to promote my lecture that evening at LSU. I'd done 2 of the interviews. The third reporter was nowhere to be found. The station manager knew I had other things to do, was giving me coffee, looking at his watch. He was embarrassed, but he wanted to keep me there for that third interview. Out of the blue, he said, "The guy you really ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. He handled the wreckage of one of those saucers when he was in the military." I practically dropped my teeth. "What do you know about him?" "He lives in Houma." That didn't tell me anything because I didn't know where Houma was. It's a big city in Louisiana. And I did visit there later to speak to Jesse. "We are ham radio buddies," he told me, the station manager. "You should talk to him." Okay, the third reporter, I've heard lots of stories, and you sort of put it in your gray basket. We'll see what we can do. It was a great crowd that night, and the next day I was at the airport early, called information, got a number for Jesse Marcel, and called him. He told me his story. As I found out later, he couldn't deny his involvement, as his name was in papers across the country. I didn't know it when I called him. People say, "Why did he talk to you?" Well, he didn't have a choice. He had to talk to somebody because he couldn't lie about it when it was public record. Soon thereafter, I heard about the plains of San Agustin crash after a lecture in Bemidji, Minnesota. I shared both stories with an old colleague from Pittsburgh, Bill Moore, who lived in Minnesota. He had a third story from the Flying Saucer Review in the UK, which is still being published, which is rather amazing that it's gone on this long. An English actor named Huey Green had noted that he heard about a crashed saucer in New Mexico when driving from Los Angeles to Philadelphia. The date was recalled as early July 1947. That was not a trip you made very often back then. You can imagine what the roads were like at that time. Bill went to the University of Minnesota Library, looked at the newspaper department, found the story, verifying what I'd been told, giving us new names. The next year and a half, we found 62 people in conjunction with that case. That went up to 92 a few years later. And these guys have added, I don't know how many hundred since then. Remember, we're talking about the most elite military group in the world. I got lucky. I called the Roswell Daily Record, which I hadn't known existed before that, looked in editor and publisher. I mentioned that I had some articles noting a crash of a saucer as reported by a Walter Hout, it's spelled 4 different ways. And I was shocked to be told, before I could finish the sentence, oh, his wife works here. Boy, talk about serendipity. How lucky can you get? I talked to the wife, talked to Walter. He was a big help to all of us in our research on Roswell, well thought of throughout the Roswell community. I found the son of the rancher. The telephone operators were nice then. I said, I'd like to find anybody named Brazel. What city? I don't know. Southeastern New Mexico. She said, oh, I've got a William Brazel in Carrizozo. Is that in southeastern New Mexico? Yes. Okay, let's take it. He had just gotten his phone 2 weeks before. So how lucky can you get, I guess? Now, one I planned. One of the people that shows up in a key picture that got very wide distribution is, at that time, Colonel Thomas Jefferson Dubose, Chief of Staff to General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force, which is where the 509th was. This is in Fort Worth, Texas. I checked with West Point. Son of a gun, he was still alive. He was in his 80s. And he was very forthcoming when I went to visit him. And Don and I went down there, and we have it on tape. I've got a DVD out there, our interview with retired General Dubose. You don't often get a chance to talk to a general about something this important. Several of us here will be speaking at the Roswell Festival, which is early July. Much of the early Roswell research, I better stress, was done before the internet. It was hard work finding people. You called information, hoped they knew something, and so forth. And you're very lucky that today a key witness is right here, Colonel Jesse A. Marcel Jr., a medical doctor, called back in the Army at age 68 to fight in Iraq, flew over 200 combat hours as a flight surgeon in helicopters. His father was Major Jesse Marcel, and he also handled wreckage in 1947. There are many Roswell debunkers who do their research by proclamation, not investigation. Their motto is, don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up. What the public doesn't know, I won't tell them. We have all found these people. As a physicist, I want facts, not fantasy. So I am most grateful for this opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is also a military officer. I'd like to just point out one thing that came up several days in the earlier hearings, and that was the fact that non-disclosure agreements were proffered and many people were forced into signing these non-disclosure agreements. You take an oath when you go into the military to the Constitution, not to the president, not to a general, not to an admiral. You take it to the Constitution to defend the country. And many times you have better judgment on what is defending the country than many of our leaders. So, Colonel, with that caveat, I want you to come forward.
First of all, let me point out that I prepared a document last night for you all that deals with Project Blue Book and how it was orchestrated to be closed by the military. It was a planned operation to end Project Blue Book completely. And that was circulated, I think, this morning. My name is Kevin Randall, and I'm a retired lieutenant colonel with more than 20 years of service with the Army, the Air Force, and the National Guard. I served on active duty as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam and as an intelligence officer in Iraq. I served on both active duty and in the active reserve with the Air Force and ended my military career as the Provost Marshal in the Iowa National Guard. I have published more than 20 books about UFOs, starting with the UFO Casebook in 1989, and currently ending with Alien Mysteries, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups just this last month. I've been working on a book about what can be found in the government files about UFOs for the last several months. In 1988, I was at a science fiction convention and participated in a debate about UFOs with some of the top science fiction writers in the world. These included Frederick Pohl and I believe George R.R. Martin, who I mentioned here today just because of his success in recent months. When it was over, Don Schmidt talked to me about the Roswell UFO crash and said that the Center for UFO Studies was beginning some research into it. He thought my military background might be a benefit because many of the witnesses were retired military, and of course many of the witnesses had been members of the military at the time of the events. One of the first things I noticed was that Colonel Thomas DuBose had been identified as General Roger Ramey's aide, but brigadier generals don't have a full colonel as an aide. DuBose was the chief of staff, a much more important position. DuBose would later provide some very interesting testimony about what had been seen and done, include transferring the Roswell debris to SAC headquarters in Washington, D.C. at the time, all documented on videotape. We made our first trip to Roswell in February 1989. We started in Albuquerque and had a meeting with Frank Joyce, but when we arrived, Joyce begged off, saying that he was ill. We met with a group of UFO researchers in Albuquerque, but they turned out to be a group of people more interested in the New Age phenomenon and not exactly UFO researchers. At any rate, they had nothing of interest for us and they had no insights into the Roswell case. We headed to Roswell and met with Cliff Stone. He knew a great deal about UFOs, but was unable to shed any insights into the Roswell case, other than the crash site was beyond twin windmills. We thought this might be a really good clue until we saw how many windmills there were in New Mexico. Our last interview was with Bill Brazel, son of Mac, who had found the debris. I didn't hold out much hope for this, but when we met with him in Carrizosa, New Mexico, he was able to provide us with some very interesting information. We chatted for a few minutes, and then Brazel said to us, "My dad found this thing," and we were off. Bill told us what had happened to his father, Mac, how he had been held at the base in Roswell for a number of days, how he'd been asked not to talk about it. I suppose you could say he was sworn to secrecy, though there didn't seem to be any threats made to him and no documents signed. Mac didn't even tell his son Bill much about what he had seen. Bill told us that he was out on the ranch in the next couple of years where the object had crashed, or at least touched down briefly, where his dad had found this debris. He would look for some of it. He described for us on audio tape 3 items that he found over the years. A piece of wood-like material that was so tough he couldn't get a sliver on it when he tried to carving on it with his pocket knife, which he said he used to cut barbed wire. He said it was also that it was very lightweight, it was brown, it seemed to be like balsa wood. He found a bit of wire that he said you could shine a light into one end and it would come out the other, which of course is fiber optics. And he had a piece of foil, the famous foil, that could be crushed into a ball and then unfold itself without a sign of a wrinkle or a crease. Bill showed it to his father, who said, "That looks like some of the contraption I found." At this point, we realized that there was more than a misidentified weather balloon, as the Air Force had suggested in 1947. It was clear from the descriptions of the material that Brazel himself had held, which he described for us, was not something that had been manufactured on Earth. We knew that there was a lot more work to be done. I located former Major, later retired Colonel, Edwin Easley, who was a Provost Marshal in the base in 1947. The Provost Marshal is similar to the Chief of Police in a city, but a Provost Marshal also has a number of other duties revolving around security. Easley, because this was an atomic strike force, had a greater responsibility of officers of a similar grade at other military installations. He told me on audio tape several times that he'd been sworn to secrecy. Finally, somewhat exasperated with my questions, he said, "I can't talk about it. I promised the president that I wouldn't." Now, I don't know if he talked to President Truman personally or a representative of the president, which is about the same thing, but whatever the circumstance, he believed he had promised the president he wouldn't talk about it. Skeptics ask, would the president talk to a major? And I say, an obscure lieutenant colonel talked to the president and the Doolittle raid was born. Easley confirmed that Brazel had been held on the base for several days. He said that Brazel was held in the guest house, which is not exactly jail, but if you have a guard on the door and you're not allowed to leave, it really doesn't matter how comfortable the quarters are, it still qualifies as a jail. I will note that we can prove Brazel was in Roswell after he first reported the find based on the documentation we have. Neighbors tell us he complained to them about being held there. Marion Strickland, one of the neighbors, said on videotape that Brazel had been gone for several days and he was mad about it. So Easley confirmed part of the story for us. Easley was also asked by me if the craft was extraterrestrial. What happened precisely is that I asked him if we were following the right path. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We think it was extraterrestrial." And he said, "Well, that's not the wrong path." Every member of Colonel Blanchard's staff, Blanchard being the commanding officer at Roswell at the time, and who later was in line to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force, gave us a variation of that. Major Jesse Marcel Sr., the Air Force intelligence officer at the time, said, on videotape, "It seems that it was something that came to Earth, but it was not something made on Earth." Let me say here that the skeptics have attempted to slander the memory of Blanchard by suggesting he was a loose cannon, which explains his handling of the discovery and the press release that he ordered issued. But his ratings, not long after the Roswell crash, by his superior officers, he was rated quite high, and there was nothing mentioned about the Roswell case. A loose cannon is not promoted to general and is not destined to be the Chief of Staff. Major Patrick Saunders, the base adjutant, who wouldn't talk much about the Roswell case when I interviewed him, did leave some documentation for us. He wrote on the flyleaf to the book, UFO Crash at Roswell, "Here's the truth, and I still haven't told anybody anything." And he signed it Pat. This page is called Damage Control, and it tells that files were altered, that they changed personnel records and the code words, and that the bodies and the craft were removed from Roswell. In a letter to his daughter, which he kindly sent to me, Saunders talked about how they had successfully hid the paper trail. Walter Hott, the man who wrote the press release announcing that they had captured a flying saucer, signed an affidavit about what he had seen, which included craft and bodies. Hott said that in his position as PIO, that he often operated as Colonel Blanchard's aide de camp, a colonel not being authorized an aide. There's been some controversy about Hott's statement because for 20 years that I knew him, he had always said that he just wrote the press release. He didn't know anything beyond that. He didn't see anything beyond that. Then in the affidavit signed and released after his death, he said that he had seen the bodies. It was a direct contradiction of what he had claimed. 10 years before that, I interviewed a fellow named Richard Harris. He was a finance officer at the Roswell Army Airfield, and he helped Patrick Saunders bury the expenditure of money. Let me digress here for just a moment. Everything has to be paid for by the military, or in the military, and all expenditures must be accounted for. You can't send an aircraft on a training flight, for example, without naming a funding source for that flight. Of course, you can have a cross-country training flight from Roswell to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, a perfectly legitimate expense. And you can always put the wreckage of an alien craft or the bodies on the flight without having to notice it or note it. The flight is paid for out of the training budget, and there is no need to mention the genesis of the mission, which is to take the stuff to Ohio. So Harris confirmed some of what Saunders had said, but more importantly, he told me that he'd seen the bodies, or he had almost seen the bodies. According to Harris, he was in a hangar where the bodies were temporarily located, and Hott asked him if he wanted to see them. Harris said that he put his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn it. This stunned me. Given the chance, I would have opened the door. But that's today in 1947. Harris said that he didn't want to see that. But it confirms to an extent what Walter Hott said about seeing the bodies. And as I say, Harris told me this 10 years before Walter Hott mentioned anything like that. Now, I have noticed I have just a minute left, and I had some interesting things I wanted to cover, but let me just say this. The Air Force claimed this was Project Mogul. The documentation suggests it was flight number 4, but when we look at the diary created by Dr. Albert Crary, who is the leader of the project, he said flight number 4 had been canceled. There was no flight number 4. There is a note that says that they had made it some kind of a test flight, but it's not part of the official record of the project in New Mexico. Mogul, by the way, was not highly classified. The equipment was off the shelf. What they were doing in New Mexico was published in the newspapers, and worse still, according to the documentation, these flights had to be announced in the FAA NOTAMs. These notices to airmen were items that could affect aerial navigation. An array of balloons, some 600 feet long, drifting along at tens of thousands of feet, fit that definition. Moore was aware of that in 1995, wrote that they had not contacted the FAA because they didn't expect this mythical flight number 4 to leave the restricted area. I wanted to mention one final thing, and I see my time has expired. But on July 8th, they made the press release. On July 9th, according to the newspapers, the United Press reported, reports of flying saucers whizzing through the sky fell off sharply today as the Army and the Navy began a concentrated campaign to stop the rumors. The question is, what happened to make them stop on July 9th when they had published everything else? I will say this, in 1947, the Air Force said what fell at Roswell was a weather balloon. When they made their investigation in the mid-1990s, they said they lied about that. It wasn't a weather balloon, it was a weather balloon. They just changed the name. It counted a cluster of balloons. It was nothing special about them. They were just weather balloons tethered together in a long train, but it did not answer the question. Why did the service members at Roswell fail to identify it as such? Why could they not identify a weather balloon, no matter what name you apply to it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we continue, we're going to take a quick break, so please stay tuned.
And thank you for the brevity of your statements thus far. I want to clear up something because we've got 3 Marcells there, and we're talking about your father, who was a major intelligence officer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, then you're a colonel in the Army that was a medical doctor in addition to that, and then you've got your son. You would be Marcel number 2. He's Marcel number 3. Okay, now, and your position at this point, and then we've got Denise, who I presume is your wife? Sister, okay. So we got the whole family here, and we're going to get testimony from all of you. Appreciate that. And so, Colonel, please proceed.
Yes, sir. I'm the son of Major Jesse Marcel, who was the intelligence officer for the 509th Composite Bomb Group based out of Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. The 509th, as you may recall, was the squadron who entered the war with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My dad's credentials obviously were very impressive. In the course of his career, he was not only one of the few officers selected for the 509th, but he also went to radar school and also was a staff member of the Air Force Intelligence Officer. The radar school was important because in that he would have been very familiar with all kind of weather balloons and radar targets and the paraphernalia associated with this kind of a device, weather balloon or mogul balloon. But a balloon is still a balloon with off-the-shelf material. I myself followed a career in medicine, graduating from the LSU School of Medicine in 1961, and I joined the military shortly after my graduation and internship. My first taste of the military was being stationed on board the USS Renville, which was a troop transport ship destined for Cuba. We spent several weeks sailing around in circles south of Cuba in preparation for the invasion, which fortunately never happened, or else I wouldn't be here. Really. And I ended my career as an Army colonel in December of 2005 after a 13-month tour in Iraq, where I gained 200 hours of combat flying and things like that, just having fun out there, really. And I did not come home entirely unscathed. However, I got severe PTSD from all the rigmarole, and also developed a weakness in my legs that they think is related to some sort of toxic contamination that I became exposed to in Iraq. But that's neither here nor there. Actually, my story for the Roswell part began in the wee hours in the morning of July 1947, when I was awakened by my dad, who was returning from an assignment to collect debris of unknown origin from a ranch out of Roswell. This is the Foster Ranch, and this is the debris that Mac Brazel had run across. Apparently, the rancher by the name of Mac Brazel notified the local sheriff of Chavez County of the downing of some sort of aircraft on his land. He was not quite sure what the nature of this was. He'd seen weather balloons, go down there before, so he was not sure it was that either, but it was something very different. The sheriff in Chavez County contacted Colonel Blanchard, who was the commander of the Air Force Base in Roswell. Now, Colonel Blanchard knew my dad was the intelligence officer, so he dispatched my dad and a CIC agent, Sheridan Cavett, to investigate what this was, whether it was one of our planes or just whatever, just an unknown crash site. So it was their job to go ahead and ascertain what was out there and bring representative portions of this back to the base so they could study it to make a final determination of this. As it turns out, our house happened to be on the way to the base, and this is in the wee hours of the morning. So my dad, knowing that he had seen something very special, wanted my mother and myself to look at this also, because as he said, you'll never see this again. So what he did, he stopped off at the house, awakened my mother and myself, and again, the wee hours of the morning. It's summertime. I've been playing all day with my bicycles and things like that. I was 11 years old at the time, however. And he brought us into the kitchen, and I saw a smattering of this strange debris on the kitchen floor that he had pre-positioned. He said, look at this. I think this is what you call a flying saucer or remains thereof. I was not quite sure what a flying saucer was at that time because I was more interested in bicycling and using my .22 rifle for practice. But at any rate, the first thing he wanted us to do, or me particularly, was to check the debris out, make sure there was no electronic components there, looking for vacuum tubes, resistors, condensers, and things like that. But there wasn't any. And he already knew that, but he wanted me to satisfy my own curiosity as this. The debris itself consisted of three components, three types. There was a foil, a very tough metallic foil of some nature that I can't really describe. I have to add that I did not see the bending and unbending of it, but my dad witnessed it. He said it would, if you fold it over, it would unfold and assume its original form. In addition, there was a black plastic debris, like a broken phonograph record. But the strangest thing I saw was, as being passed around right now, was this is a replica of one of the I-beams, or the beams I saw in the wreckage. In that you'll note there's some symbols written along the inside surface of this, and they're a purplish violet hue, semi-reflective of light. But this is basically what this was.
Is this a replica? Or
Yes, sir, this is a replica. If it was original, I wouldn't have it.
Well, you never know. That's why we're asking.
That's right. So, but anyway, my dad drove the debris into the base that night. I think it was that night or maybe early next morning, where he was assigned by Colonel Blanchard to fly the material to General Ramey's office in Fort Worth. This was flown in the belly of a B-29 under armed guard. So my dad, I then saw a picture of my dad taken in General Ramey's office, holding what was obviously a radar target. They had already switched the debris. And the look on his face is quite telling. He says, you gotta be kidding me. This is not what I saw, and this is not what I saw either. But at any rate, that's where the cover-up began, in General Ramey's office. So when my dad got home, he sat my mother and myself down and said in no uncertain terms, you will never talk about this. This is a non-event. And yes, sir, I was an Army brat, so I was following orders. So I never discussed this with my friends or anybody else until after Stan Friedman interviewed my dad in 1978.
Great.
So
Thank you very much.
yes, sir.
Let me reemphasize. As a military officer, you took an oath to the Constitution, not to General Ramey or to anybody else. It's the Constitution.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
We move now to your son, Jesse, the third.
Third, yep.
Marcel. Marcel's a French name? Marcel? Yeah.
Thank you to distinguished members of the committee. I am here today not to speak as an expert witness to what I have heard and researched about Roswell, but simply to help you to get to know two great men. My grandfather, Major Jesse Marcel Sr., and my father, Dr. Jesse Marcel. My grandfather was a simple man who just wanted to lead a simple life.
Closer to the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. I could restate that. My grandfather was a simple man who just wanted to lead a simple life. Starting at a very early age, when he wasn't helping the family with the farm, he would sneak away to find parts to build radios. Later in his life, before entering the war, he would use these skills to build a ham radio that would become a lifelong passion. He would spend endless hours chatting with people from around the world. Things would change rapidly as we were pulled into the Second World War. On his own accord, he went from his job as a civilian draftsman to join the war effort, where he excelled in his duties from the very beginning. His superiors recognized his aptitude towards problem solving and sent him to intelligence school. Again, he excelled in his courses and was asked to teach the next incoming class. He would eventually end up in the Roswell Air Force Base working in our nuclear bombing program with the 509th Composite. With the war over and a life returning to a sense of normalcy, Grandpa would receive a simple order, an order that would change his and most of our lives forever. The heavens would open up and send us a visitor that would establish the words alien and flying saucer in the English vernacular, and it was him they sent to investigate. Decades later, my father followed in Grandpa's footsteps as a military man serving the Navy to train to be a medical doctor. Soon after, he would settle down in Clancy, Montana to raise a family and continue in the reserves to become a helicopter pilot. As the only NT, I remember as a child going with my father on his rounds, not the ones to the hospital, but the ones where he would visit his parents in their homes. He would carry in his little black bag and take care of his patients in the same caring way that he would take care of the rest of us. Back in the office, if a child showed up in ratty shoes to his appointment, a new pair would be waiting for him on their next visit. I remember very fondly watching him not only build a oscilloscope, but his design and construction of a computer guidance system for the oscilloscope long before there was such a thing, at least on an amateur level. He would spend endless hours wrapping small green glass switches that would eventually become the brain. In the summer, we would all pile into a van, RV, or whatever form of transportation that we'd have available to us and head to home, Louisiana, where my grandparents had lived or had returned to live out the rest of their lives. I remember so clearly driving down the shell-covered road leading up to their house, with the most notable feature being a huge greenhouse that easily equaled the size of their residence that my grandfather lovingly built for his wife, Vio. My grandmother had a green thumb like no other. My father would send her a tomato plant that would barely survive the short Montana summers into immense vegetation that would reach the floor to ceiling. Each morning, my grandfather would lead me to his shop, occupying a space between the house and the garage. He'd reach up into the rafters and pull down fishing poles that had been there for decades. These poles were not made of fiberglass, but of bamboo. Very simple, but effective in their trade. I recall leaning against a table saw in his workshop, watching him attach the reel with a hand that was missing a digit from some long-ago battle with that same table saw. He would add the weights and the bobber from 2 rusty old tackle boxes and finish the session off with showing me how to delicately hook the worm without injuring myself, although this was not always the case. We'd make our way to the back door and out on his lawn that ran up against a bayou. After a couple of casts, we could sit back and talk and enjoy each other's company. My grandfather's other great obsessions were sports. LSU provided the teams that he most favored and occupied his weekend TV viewing hours. I'll always remember Grandpa as a gentle giant who somehow lived the life of a Southern gentleman who would be at least partially responsible for changing the way people of our world would look into the night skies and think to themselves, maybe, just maybe, somebody was looking back. Today, I share these same stories I learned as a child with my own kids. Roswell is a new topic of conversation between the kids and their teachers in elementary school. The legacy will go on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now for your sister.
Well, first of all, I also want to thank the committee for taking the time to listen to our family's history. My name is Denise Marcel. I am the granddaughter of Major Jesse Marcel Sr. and the daughter of retired Colonel Dr. Marcel Jr. My grandfather was the first military officer at a UFO crash site in Roswell, New Mexico. While there, he collected some of the crash site debris. He was so amazed by the characteristics of the debris, he decided he had to show my father and grandmother. And whatever it was that they had seen, it has had a great impact on our family. When we moved to Clancy, Montana in the early 70s, my father built a telescope in our backyard. Now, this wasn't one of your average, ordinary telescopes. To start, he dug a hole in our backyard the size of a small room. For months, I remember my mother and us kids helping him polish this very large mirror. From there, he began constructing the telescope, including building a rotating dome. This was a telescope that was later loaned to the Helena Astronomy Association, and he had built this from top to bottom. My dad, who was a man who had witnessed something, this was a man who was driven. That telescope opened up a whole new world for our family. It was around the age of 9 that I first became aware of UFOs, not only because of the telescope, but also because there were times my father and us kids would camp out at night specifically looking for movement in the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of a UFO. One has to remember, we didn't have the internet then, and UFOs were not discussed like they are today. I do not think that my parents would lead us to believe at such a young age that UFOs existed if my father and grandfather had not witnessed something extraordinary. In January of 1997, I accompanied my father and Kent Jeffries to Washington, D.C. for a hypnosis session that Dr. Neil Hibbler would conduct over the course of 3 days. Dr. Hibbler was one of the world's leading experts who used hypnotic regressions for forensic purposes. I had been very fortunate to be able to participate because I had just been certified as a hypnotherapist. The sessions were successful. While under hypnosis, my father said he couldn't believe how vividly he could see his dad. I saw the emotion in his face and how it touched his heart seeing his father so clearly that day. During the sessions, my father recalls being woken up by my grandfather telling him to come and look at a piece of a flying saucer, a term in which most people, including himself, was not familiar with. When asked about the materials, my father's descriptions did not waver from what he had been describing throughout the years. One of the more interesting facets of the debris descriptions are the symbols or hieroglyphics that my father had seen on the I-beam. While under hypnosis, the facts remained the same. Just like when he was a child, he motioned grabbing the I-beam and holding it above his head to get a better look at the purple reflecting symbols. The military claimed that these symbols were merely Christmas-wrapped tape, but it is very unlikely and does not seem possible that 3 people did not recognize simple holiday decorations on some Scotch tape. Another interesting fact my father recalled was that soon after the incident, his father told the family never to talk about it again, that it was a non-event. Now, why would they have to remain silent about a weather balloon? It doesn't make any sense to me. It has been said that since my father did not remember anything new from those sessions and did not remember seeing any exotic debris, electronic components, or anything that resembled motors, which they were specifically looking for, this material could not have been from a UFO, that the material was just too mundane. I believe this argument works against itself, because if it had been some radar device, there should have been some very basic electronic components, and it would have been mundane. Therefore, my grandfather would never have brought it home to show his family. The only explanation that he brought this home was because he was very excited about what he had found. My grandfather and father were very dedicated military men and always followed through with their orders. They both remained silent to the public about the incident until my grandfather had been approached by Stanton Friedman nearly 30 years after the event. During interviews, my grandfather was asked about the materials, and he would say, quote, "It was not anything from this earth. That I am quite sure of," end quote. These words would change the course of the Marcel family. The reason he was ordered to go to the site was because he was an intelligence officer familiar with all of the materials used in aircraft and travel. He was very qualified to make an assessment of the crash site debris. And for the record, my grandfather had nothing to gain when he spoke to Stanton Friedman. He just felt the same way that I do, that the world should know the truth. It has affected my family's life in so many good ways and some bad. But because of this, I was also given the greatest gift of all, and that is to have an open mind. I feel that sometimes agendas are put in front of our rights of being citizens, and not everything that the government has told us is the truth. Because when it comes to the Roswell incident, I believe my grandfather and my father. Last and certainly not least, it is my hope that from my father, my grandfather, and all of the other wonderful people who have found the courage to step up and tell the truth this week will be given the respect and recognition that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say, that the Marcel family has a very close friend. His name is Richard O'Connor. I don't know if you've seen what he's put forward to support you. So he's a friend of yours. I want to now turn to for the members' sake, we have 7 minutes that we can delve into with these people. And I'll first turn to Merrill Cook to start the process. Yes, that's right. I'm getting there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donald Schmidt, I'd like to start with you. You said that you went down to New Mexico with an idea of doing something in the fiction area. You weren't really much of a believer.
No.
But it changed your mind.
That was Kevin Randall and myself, correct.
And what changed your mind is you said you met with firsthand witnesses.
Correct.
Now, I'd like to know what year that was.
That was February of 1989.
Okay, and could you tell me who those firsthand witnesses were that you met with?
Dr. Randall had mentioned specifically it was the son of W.W. Mac Brazo, Bill Brazo Jr., and we could also add his wife, Shirley, who were both first-hand witnesses to the material.
So you talked to them on that occasion?
We had the opportunity at that time and many times thereafter, including other members of the Brazo family. What we could also point out is that Bill Jr., the son of the rancher, was fortunate enough to discover additional remnants from the crash months thereafter, especially after heavy rains, pieces would wash to the surface. Now bear in mind, we already had firsthand accounts that there were 50 to 60 troops at the debris field site for the course of 2.5 to 3 days, walking shoulder to shoulder with wheelbarrows going to check sites. It required that much time to clear this site in contrast to a weather balloon, which would have taken all of them a few minutes for someone to toss over their shoulder, toss into the back of a pickup truck.
I have almost no doubt that something crashed there, that there was a lot of pickup, and I just want to know exactly who it was you talked to. And you've answered that very well. I'd like to, we got a lot of witnesses here that I really want an opportunity to talk to. Lieutenant Colonel Randall, you had talked about work you've done to show why Air Force Project Blue Book was, you used some rather negative language about it. And why it was just, a cover-up is what you said?
What happened all during the 1960s, there is a series of letters you see in the Project Blue Book files where they're requesting to get Project Blue Book out of ATEC into the Secretary of the Air Force's Office of Information to de-emphasize the importance of Project Blue Book.
Okay, now, de-emphasizing the importance of Project Blue Book, that's not exactly the same thing. And that's, when I look at that, I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth, but I got to focus in on a question here, and that's, when the University of Colorado was asked to help them make a decision about Project Blue Book, let's put it that way. And when the University of Colorado wrote a report, I think you're all correct in saying that what the report said wasn't exactly the way it was characterized, even certainly by the government, and even and by the media as well. But isn't it true that it didn't say anything about it all being nonsense? It just said, we don't want to fund additional work on collecting this data that we are publishing to the world. I mean, there are 101 incidents published that we can read about from Project Blue Book. Am I correct? Well, what I'm asking you have absolutely no faith, and that's fine, in the National Science Foundation. Is that what you're telling us?
What I'm saying,
I just want to make sure I got it.
No, what I'm saying is that the outcome of the scientific investigation was preordained. There's a letter from Lieutenant Colonel Hippler to committee members at the Condon Committee at the University of Colorado saying, this is what we want you to find. They haven't investigated a case, they haven't looked at anything, but here's what we want you to find. You have to say something nice about the Air Force investigation. You have to say that it does not affect national security, and allow us to close it down, because if you don't do that, we're going to be stuck with this for another 20 years.
And so the University of Colorado pulled the wool over the National Science Foundation. Folks, is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
And they just
during the
didn't get it.
investigation,
They couldn't figure out that maybe there was influence from the Air Force on what Colorado
they
was.
didn't care. What they were, the whole purpose of the Condon Committee was to end Project Blue Book and stop the Air Force investigation. During the Condon Committee's time in session, they were supposed to investigate cases that came up. There was a marvelous case from Shag Harbor, Canada, where something was photographed in the air. It was seen to hit the ground. United States Navy responded. The Canadian military forces responded. And there's even evidence that the Russians responded. The Condon Committee's investigation was to make a phone call to Canada and say, oh, it's just a couple of teenagers who saw something strange. We're not going to bother with it.
No,
Now,
okay.
Don,
And you've, I mean, I appreciate your answer. I'm going to move on, not
All right.
because I don't want you to have more opportunity, but I'm so particularly interested in what Colonel Marcel, Dr. Colonel, and boy, you should be proud of these children and grandchildren of Jesse Sr. You have done a wonderful job in establishing, you know, just that story about the fishing pole. You're talking about an honest grandfather. I mean, that came, you didn't have to even use that word. The way you described that, and to you too, Denise. And I'm very impressed with you, Jesse Marcel Jr. I mean, you're one of the very few witnesses that have actually held or seen or accompanied your father with something in your hand that came from this incident, or an incident that, let me put it this way. Somebody that's a friend of mine, somebody that I've listened to, somebody I already said I had respect for, a different party, but former Governor Bill Richardson has said to me, and others with us in a discussion we had with him, that everything you have said is honest. There's no question in his mind that that debris is there, it happened, and what you've said about your father and doing all that is absolutely true. What you've said to me here directly simply reinforces something I believe, because I have a lot of faith in the integrity of the man I just mentioned, Bill Richardson. But I have to say this. I'm looking at you straight in the eyes here. I know that you believe that's from an extraterrestrial source, but can you say honestly to this committee that you know that for some reason, or that there's something that you absolutely know that the government is hiding? Because Bill Richardson agrees with you that they should open the files. I agree with you, they should open those Roswell files. We should see exactly what might remain from whatever you and your father took over. So yeah, you give this committee a lot of reasons for us to say, open those files. But I just want to hear an answer to the question I gave you.
Years ago, I was called to Washington. I was going to a meeting, and there was a gentleman by the name of Dick D'Amato who wanted to interview me when I got to Washington. And he was in the Capitol building, Senate Room 228, I believe, if I remember right. But he said he wanted to talk to me about what I saw in Roswell. So I went up to the Capitol building, and very friendly, very nice gentleman. He says, you know, we want to talk about what you saw in Roswell. And he asked me, did I want to talk in a secure room? And I said, well, sir, I'm not going to say anything I haven't said publicly already. He says, but I might tell you something. And so we'll talk in a secure room. So we went down into the basements, you know, several floors down below in the Capitol building, and there was this beautiful meeting room there with a big table there with the pictures of our founding fathers across the overhead there. And when we sat down, he sat at the head of the table. I sat to his right. He had a legal pad to take notes on, and there was a book on the table too. It was called Majestic. It was a book by Whitley Strieber, which actually is a fictional account of an established fact there. And he said, this is not fiction. So he admitted to me right there, this is not fiction. This is a story about the Roswell, you know, in a fictionalized version.
And so it's the conclusion you came to after you had a chance to listen to some people that had analyzed some of that material. Am I
Yes.
correct in that?
Yes.
And I'm not necessarily saying you may have been right or wrong on that. I'm just wanting to know how you arrived at your decision that you believe it is from non-terrestrial sources or extraterrestrial sources.
Well, this is the first time somebody in the inner sanctions of our government admitted to me that this is not fiction, the Roswell. And I said, I know it isn't. So when are you guys going to tell the public about this? And he said, well, if it was up to me, I'd have done it yesterday. But he says it's not up to me. I'm just here to investigate the cost of the investigation, cost of keeping it secret and all that. He said, in reality, there is, and these are his words, that there's a black government, which sounds really conspiratorial, but that's what he said. He said they have control of the debris, and they answer to no one, they're not elected, and they have unlimited funds to spend. And he said they're the ones who have it, and they have control over it. So you can tell me what that meant, but that's what he said.
I obviously don't, but thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Roswell Hearings, and if you'd like to learn more about the citizen hearing on UFO disclosure, please see the show notes. And if you've witnessed something paranormal, I'd like to hear your story. You can contact me through email, voice message, or on our website, and these links can be found in the show notes as well. And until next time, I hope you all have a great beginning to your week, and I look forward to seeing you back here on Wednesday as we continue our journey into the unexplained, right here on Paranormal Mysteries.